Amen. Good evening. Good to see all of you tonight as we are back in our study of Daniel. We have just a couple more sessions to go as we go through our study Decoding Daniel. I hope it's been a blessing to you so far. And tonight, session 6, we will call Clarity and Confusion. Clarity and confusion. And maybe something you have been experiencing in our study of Daniel. Hopefully some things have been clarified and some things have been confusing. And I hate to tell you, there'll be a little bit more of that tonight. Actually, I can't help but think of something that happened to me a few weeks ago. I got called a very ugly name. And it was done by our very own David Smith. And he's not here tonight to defend himself, which is why tonight I'm telling you about this, so he can't defend himself. But a few weeks ago, he called me it was terrible, terrible. I almost don't want to repeat what he called me, but I'm going to anyway. He called me barbatulous. I know. Can you believe he did that? I mean, sticks and stones, but this one hurt me. Barbatulous. How dare he? And if you don't know what the word barbatulous means, well, neither did I. But when I looked it up, I got incredibly offended. Actually, he sent it to me as a word of the day post, but it was sent to me in such a way I knew he was aiming it at me. To be called barbatulous means that you are inefficient at growing a beard. Come on. He knows that I was only one of a few people who on the Easter musical last year didn't grow a beard and had to put a fake one on. I'm so offended that he would call me barbatulous. It's kind of true, but actually barbatulism is a euphemism for it's not just about that you can't grow a good sufficient beard. It also means you are lacking in wisdom. Oh yeah, because it means, and when it was used, and it's not really used in any context today, but to call somebody barbatulous was to say that your beard and your wisdom are in the stubble phase. In a day when a beard was equated with manhood and also maturity and wisdom, the older you were, the bigger and longer your beard was. If you were lacking in a beard, you were seen to be lacking in wisdom. See, now you see why I was so offended. I've never been so offended and learned so much at the same time. That's incredible. Barbatulous. Well, I may be barbatulous when it comes to growing the beard, but I didn't count myself barbatulous when it came to wisdom. I thought I was doing pretty good. And then I started studying Daniel chapter 9. And maybe he's on to something, because I get to it and I'm going, what did I just read? And you're going to feel the same way tonight. We're going to look at the last few verses of Daniel 9. When we were gathered 2 weeks ago, we looked at the first part of Daniel 9, the prayer of Daniel, a prayer of confession and repentance, a prayer of seeking God and His glory. And then we saw immediately God answered. He sent the angel to Daniel and said, when you began praying, a word went out. And God is here to answer your prayer and tell you what He's going to do. And so in the rest of Daniel 9, he explains some things, but I'm going to tell you this evening that just about every word and every phrase of this last part of Daniel 9 is debated and discussed and even disagreed upon. It can be very confusing. It's easy to get lost in this part. It is a passage that anybody that studies the book of Daniel wants to look at, but everybody who studies the book of Daniel struggles with. And I'm going to tell you right now, to be honest with you, one of my goals tonight is to confuse you. I know that's not very nice of me, but I'm going to do that. and I'm going to do it on purpose. Let's start by just reading our passage. We will, again, be in Daniel 9. We'll be looking at verse 24 through 27. It says this is the angel speaking to Daniel. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know, therefore, and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall come the one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Do I even really need to explain any of that tonight? Can we just go ahead and go on home? I mean, you've got it, right? It's incredibly difficult. And so this evening, I'd simply like us to go back. I'm going to go back to the first of those 4 verses we read, and I'm going to highlight for you the key phrases. And again, honestly, I'll tell you, we will only scratch the surface tonight of all the different interpretive questions and issues related to this passage. I simply want to show you all the different things that are discussed and debated about this passage. So let's go one by one. Let's start by looking at the phrase 70 weeks. 70 weeks. Now, of all the things we're going to talk about tonight, this is one that has probably the greatest amount of agreement on what 70 weeks mean, although it's not universally agreed upon. 70 weeks is most often interpreted as 70 weeks of years, which would also be 490 years. We see that as an example in Scripture in other places. When it talks of weeks, it means weeks of years. Now, some people do follow that it is literally just 70 weeks, but most people, and for a lot of the reasons of what comes next and the explanations of this time period, most people understand this. Most theologians and commentators will tell you 70 weeks means 70 weeks of years. So right off the bat, the angel is telling Daniel there's a time period I'm referring to. However, this 70 weeks of years, does this represent a literal number, a rounded number, or symbolic number? If you were with me 2 weeks ago when we talked about the beginning of this passage, when Daniel was looking at the prophecy of Jeremiah and the 70 years of captivity, we talked about those options, literal, rounded, or symbolic. And we said that in that case, the best translation was rounded, close to 70. Well, does that mean when it talks 70 weeks of years, 490 years, is it talking about something has to happen exactly in 490 years or close to, rounded up to 490 years? Or some would just say, well, it's a symbolic number of completeness and divinity and all the things, and it doesn't have to, it's not really worried about the total math. There's different options out there. Let's just say that there are 70 weeks of years that's being talked about. Now, after the 70 weeks we see that there's a sixfold purpose that the angel is talking about, that's something, a sixfold thing that has to be completed. And let me highlight what those things are. The 6 items the angel said, the things that must happen is these 7 weeks are going to accomplish, it's going to finish the transgression, put an end to sin, atone for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Now you would say, oh, well, that's pretty clear what he's talking about. Hold on just a moment. Even these 6 items are talked about. What is he exactly referring to? Think of it this way. When he says to finish the transgression, what transgression? Is it talking about all transgressions ever? Specific one? It's not totally clear here. The same thing goes to atone for iniquity. Is he talking about atoning for all iniquity or a specific grievance against God? That was the third one to back up. To put an end to sin. Once again, are we talking about an end of a certain or specific sin or all sin forever? Bring in everlasting righteousness. You say, well, surely that one must be clear. Is he talking about everyone's everlasting righteousness who would believe, or is he talking about the everlasting righteousness of those in a certain time period? To seal both vision and prophet. Which vision and which prophet is being talked about? To anoint a most holy place. Well, most holy place almost certainly refers to the temple and Jerusalem, but which time? My point being this, in all of these 6 things, there is some agreement of what it means, but there's also disagreement. I want to show you that those who take a hard line, it must mean this, struggle because there's some vagueness in its language of what's being referred to here. But I do want you to see the 6-fold purpose of the 70 weeks. Let's just leave it there of that particular issue, but we will come back to those 6 items. Now let's really kind of start jumping in the weeds of other passage phrases that are tough to understand. Let's look at the next one of the phrase in verse 25, going out of the word. The angel said, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word, it says what? This starts the clock. The going out of the word starts the clock of the 70 weeks, the 70 weeks of years, the 490 years. It begins this, the going out of the word. Whose word? Whose word is it referring to? Well, you say, well, it's referring to the word of the Lord. That's a very possible translation here. Well, which word of the Lord? Was it the prophecy given to Jeremiah in 605 BC? Was it the word of the Lord given in prophecy to Jeremiah in 587 BC? Was it this word of the Lord given to Daniel in 539 BC? Others will say, well, maybe it wasn't the word of the Lord. Maybe it was a word from man. Maybe one of those leaders who decreed the return to the Holy Land. Which one? Was it the decree of Cyrus, and again in 539 BC, or Darius the First in 521 BC, or Artaxerxes in 458 or 445 BC? Which one? You see there's the going out of the word, depending on how you interpret that, starts the clock anywhere from 605 to 448 BC. That's a pretty big period of time. Which one? Well, maybe you have your preference. Maybe you think you know which one, and that's fine if you do, but people have discussed this and debated and not sure what to do about it. Going out of whose word, which word? Well, let's leave that there. Are you feeling barbachelous yet? You're going to get there, I promise. So going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince. Look at the phrase, coming of an anointed one, a prince. Who is this anointed one, a prince? Now, something interesting here. Let me show you how much people have struggled with understanding and interpreting and even translating this passage. Tonight, I share with you the version we're looking at is out of the ESV, English Standard Version. Most biblical theologians say that's a very accurate and worthy translation. But if you were to look in the NASB, New American Standard Bible, another translation that's considered very accurate, highly respected, you would notice that there it says not the anointed one, a prince, but you would say the Messiah, capital M, and Prince, capital P. The people who translated the New American Standard Bible looked at this passage and say it's obviously talking about Jesus. They made an interpretive choice and said it's talking about Jesus. A great possibility it's talking specifically about Jesus. But others disagree. Some Bible translations leave it uncapitalized, say unanointed one, a prince. An anointed one, it's the word in Hebrew, Mashiach, which is where we get Messiah, but anointed, that's its proper translation is anointed one set apart for the purpose of God. An anointed one. And here the translators are saying it means anointed one, but which anointed one? They're saying it could be Jesus, and that's a great possibility. It could very well be talking specifically about the one true Messiah, the Prince, but do we know that for sure? And they're here telling you, well, we don't know that for sure. It could be a different anointed one. I mean, who could be the anointed one it's talking about if it wasn't talking about Jesus? Could it be Cyrus, who was decreed one of the returns to the Holy Land? He was called an anointed one in Isaiah 45:1. Could it be Zerubbabel or Joshua the high priest, both referred to in the book of Zechariah 4:14 as ones anointed by oil, which means anointed one? People who played a part of the return to the Holy Land, anointed for God's purpose. Some people say it must be. Now, let me tell you, the person who says, I don't necessarily believe it's talking about Jesus here, is not denying Jesus. It's very important you understand this. If somebody will look at Daniel 9 and says, the anointed one is talking about, it's referring to somebody who was anointed to bring about the return of God's people out of exile, they're not denying Jesus. They're just saying this passage isn't specifically referring to Jesus. Once again, what am I doing tonight? I'm trying to give you an idea of the debate that goes on about this passage. I'm purposely withholding exactly where I feel that it falls. I'm trying to show you the variety of opinion. Anointed one, a prince. What do we do with that passage? Next, see, almost every phrase has an issue. It says this, there shall be 7 weeks, then for 62 weeks. So it's talking about a time period of 7 weeks, which 7 weeks of years, 49 years, or 62 weeks, 434 years. Here, the English Standard Version once again separates them. And people would argue that's the most accurate way to translate the language we have before us. But if you were to look in other translations, once again, if you had the New American Standard Bible in front of you tonight, you would see that it combines it and says for 7 weeks and 62 years. The difference is important. One translation combines it together for a total period of 69 weeks of years, or 483 years, is what it's referring to. Altogether, Some translations say, here again, the ESV is saying, well, there's a 7 weeks of years period. Something must happen there. And then, not necessarily immediately, there must be a period of 62 weeks of years, and it's a separate thing that doesn't happen consecutively. Which one is correct? You may, again, have a preference or an interpretation. It's okay if you're struggling to understand which one. Even then, is the 7 and the 62 referring to specific, literal, rounded, symbolic? People have spent hours and hours and hours and hours debating on and writing about this very issue. Which one is it? It's hard to say. It is hard to say. Now, a lot of people will get into this very issue. And people love to give you timetables of the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks and all that's happened. They love to share it. And I'll be the first to tell you that when you look at the different dates of the going out of the Word, and you look at some of the dates related to things Jesus did, there are some cases where, man, that's very interesting. It's very hard to make the math work exactly to any of those things of the going out of the Word, to the specific things of Jesus. It's not impossible, but it's tough to make the math work exactly. But there are some incredible things that would point to the timeline of Jesus. And there's a part of me that really looks at that and goes, man, we see the life of Jesus fulfilling these things that's being talked about. But we have to be honest that even some of the greatest biblical minds, those who understand the text and the language way better than anything I do, struggle with understanding which interpretation to go with. I wanted you to see that tonight. Let's go on. There are a few more phrases that I want you to see. In verse 26, once again it says, unanointed one. It says, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. So after the 62 weeks, which again, you would think here is referring to 62 weeks, not a total of 69 weeks of year, 62. So this period of 434 years or close to that time period, an anointed one. Is the anointed one of verse 26 the same as verse 25? Is it specifically the same as verse 25? Some will say yes, some will say no. Some will say it is absolutely the same. It is talking about Jesus. When it says he is being cut off, it's referring to his crucifixion. I just say that's a great way to look at it and understand it. I mean, it sure sounds like it. But there are other people that could potentially fit the bill for the description. Anointed people of God that have a similar description. In fact, I mean, we've talked about some of them, one of them being Onias III. This is again in middle 100s BC, a high priest who was assassinated. He was cut off. He was a part of that time of the Jewish revolts. And we'll say, well, he was an anointed one by God. He was called by some people as an anointed one. He was cut off. It refers to him. And more, there's a large camp that says the anointed one here in verse 26 is actually referring to the Antichrist. Well, how could that be? Well, look at some of the descriptions that come after. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. It's in with, so, I mean, that seems to be referencing the anointed one, possibly. And verse 27, it talks about, and we're going to get into this week and half a week in just a moment, but the wing of abominations in the sacrifice and offerings. If those items are talking about this anointed one of 26, then it's referencing the Antichrist. So how would you call the Antichrist an anointed one? It's still a person set aside to be a part of God's plan for certain things to happen. Not the Messiah, Jesus, but an anointed one for us because God allows it. Which one is it talking about? Again, yes, I mean, I'm going to be more often to fall in the camp of it's referring to Jesus. It seems to be the cleanest interpretation, but people struggle with this. People greatly struggle with the anointed one in verse 26. Is it the same? Is it different? And who does it refer to? There's a whole branch that walks down the different views and the messianic, non-messianic, historical, eschatological viewpoints, and I could really put you to sleep with it tonight. It gets so deep in understanding how all this applies together. It's incredibly, incredibly challenging. One more phrase really to look closely at. In verse 27, the 1 week and for half of the week. The 70th week of years. The 70th week. It refers to 1 week or a period of 7 years and a half of a week for the 3.5 years. Numbers we've already run into. Numbers that Jesus appears to reference himself there in Matthew 14. We see that, Jesus, talks about these items and deals with this. The 1 week, Revelation gets in the idea of the 7-year issue and 3.5 years. So it seems to be referencing this. And once again, people are talking about, when does this happen? There are some people who say, well, the 1 week and half a week where the end of the sacrifice has already happened. We've talked about this. If you've been going through the series of Daniel, we talked about Antiochus IV, that guy who did terrible things there in Jerusalem, abominations. He ended the sacrifice at the temple. We shared in that a couple of times ago when we walked through the chart of who is the goat and the ram and the horn and all that stuff. We went through that reference back to those lessons. Some people say, well, he did these things. That's talking about that week and the half a week. But then why would Jesus refer to it again as something that is yet to come? So some people will look at, we maybe experienced 69 weeks of years, but we are on hold. In fact, one of the most popular opinions of Daniel 9 is that we are waiting on the 70th week. Others, again, have said it happened before the time of Jesus. Some will say the 70th week was all in the time of Jesus. Some people will say that the crucifixion was the midpoint, the 3.5 years, and now we wait for the rest. There's all kinds of views of what is this 70th week and when it will happen. Again, it's nice to look at and think about, and a safe view is to think yet to come. But it's challenging. And I could go on and on. I could show you how so many of these phrases we look at, people will just, what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? Confused yet? I hope so. And it's odd of me to say that. You hope, usually, typically, I make it my aim to come in as I'm teaching to bring clarity. You would expect that of me, to come in and bring a passage to you and make it easier to understand, to bring clarity to tough questions. And what I have done tonight, and on purpose, is to confuse you, to muddy the waters in this passage, to show you all these items that are being debated and talked about, and it could be this, it could be that. I've done that on purpose. I tried to make you feel very barbatulous. So why would I do such a thing? The first reason is this: to warn you against those who say, I have figured out the book of Daniel. When you start hearing somebody says, I have got it solved, I know the timeline and how this is going to all play out, I'd advise you to run the other way. Now, there's a difference between that and pastors or theologians giving you possibilities, There are certainly pastors and teachers who will say, this is how I believe the timeline plays out. And once again, I've referenced to it's some very interesting things. I encourage you to look on your own of how we see the math get very close to working out with the things that happen in the timeline of Daniel and the timeline of Jesus, and now waiting for the final things to happen. It's very interesting to look at some of those possibilities of interpretations. It's very interesting, and it's okay to talk about that. It's okay to hold a viewpoint of that. But the person who says, I know for sure exactly how this plays, run the other direction, friend. I've said it before, I said it again, God did not give us the book of Daniel so that we can figure out the timeline. I know we've called the series Decoding Daniel. And maybe that's why some of you came in and think, all right, you're finally going to make sense and give us the answer to all the things of Daniel. And I've tried to tell you, Daniel's not about trying to gather an exact timeline. It's trying to understand greater truths of the Lord. Some promises of God and how He operates. So the first reason I've done this tonight is to warn you against those who say they know that they know exactly how this is going to play out. The second reason I share this lesson with you the way I have tonight is to remind you of truth that I've already shared with you in this series, but it's worth saying once again. What God has done before, God will do again. I like what one particular commentator, Ernest Lucas, writes about this passage. Let me give you the quote. He writes in his commentary, he says, the language of Daniel 9, verses 26 and 27 is sufficiently elusive to permit the reapplication of these verses to later situations where the same pattern is appearing in history. I think there's great truth and great wisdom in that. He's saying it's sufficiently elusive. There's enough wiggle room of what it could be to look at this and say, could these things he's talking about apply to that situation, and again to that situation, and again to that situation, and once again to the future? Remember those sixfold purposes of the vision? And I said, what are they referring to? Something specific or forever? Think about that again. What are the 6 things? To finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal vision and prophet, to anoint a most holy place. Even if you feel that Daniel 9 is referencing things that have already taken place, you have to admit that these things here are not fully complete. Not yet, they're not. We wait for a day when all transgression is dealt with, when sin is finally brought to an end, when iniquity is fully atoned for completely and for forever. Bring in everlasting righteousness to seal all vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy place. Friends, that's going to happen. Those things are going to happen in their fullness, in their completion. So if you walk away somewhat confused about the interpretation of Daniel 9, don't be confused about this. What God has been doing through history, He will do again, but He will bring it about in its fullness one day through His Son, Jesus Christ. Hold on to that. Know the truth that through His Son, transgression will be taken care of. Sin will be put to an end. He atones for our iniquity. He brings in our everlasting righteousness. He seals up and completes all prophet and vision. And He will anoint that most holy of place when we see the coming down of the new earth and the new Jerusalem. Remember these things. And in doing so, you will be decoding Daniel. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you that we can be confused at times and struggle with not knowing for sure exactly what all the things mean. It's okay. Father, you did not give us the things of Daniel so that we can suddenly know exactly when and exactly how. If you had desired us to know those things, you would have told us exactly those things. This is not the puzzle that we are supposed to unravel. This is supposed to help us see what you have done before and you are doing again. This is to help us see how you've worked throughout history and through your people and through your Son, Jesus Christ, to bring about the completeness of all these things. So, Father, in maybe some confusion, help us clarify our faith. Maybe when we don't know exactly how to deal with every verse and every phrase and every word, help us strengthen our trust in you and strengthen our commitment to serve you, for you are faithful and will bring about the completion of your will and purposes. We thank you and pray all this in the powerful name of your Son, who has been given all authority in heaven and on earth.